Saukrates, welcome to Q.
Thank you for having me, Tom. It's a great thing to be a part, invited down to this kind of thing.
It's my pleasure. I want to start off, just before we go any further, I want to ask, is it true that when you were a teenager, you were hesitant to become a rapper because you didn't want to be labeled a kid rapper?
Wow, that's a good question. I forgot about that. I'd say yes. I don't know, I guess Crisscross, as we listen to that now, it was corny then, but you listen back to it now, people party to it, beach parties and the whole thing. But yeah, I guess being younger and rapping and going up against the 20-year-olds when you're 16, I don't think it was out of fear. It was more like you wanted to be respected as an adult, and you might not have as soon as they find out how old you are. So, but that didn't stop me from going in. It's more that I hung with it's older guys that brought me into the game. Mm-hmm. So I kind of just had to become that. I had to become that age, living, 7 years older than I actually was.
I can't imagine the confidence that takes. Like the idea that you had such a sense of yourself that you were able to say, again, not out of fear, you were able to say, not right now, but eventually.
Yeah. Well, it's not like I put it off. It's more like, let's get the music right. Let's get it not forcing it to sound mature, but just to make sure it feels like everybody can get it. It's not a children's music. And of course, having the help of the guys who brought me in, guys like Chase and Gadget and, the OGs that brought me in, I was able to mature faster within my music, just within conversation.
I want to talk a little bit about this debut album of yours that's being re-released, because it means so much to a generation, to legions of Canadian hip-hop fans. For those of us who weren't around in Toronto in the mid to late 90s, can you paint a picture for me of what the hip-hop scene was like back then?
Yeah, in a nutshell, it was like a peanut shell.
What do you what do you mean?
Let's literally put it in a nutshell.
All right.
Because it was such a subculture, such an underground thing that you didn't have many plateaus to access the music.
Right.
Right. So it's if you're into it, you're listening to DJ X on CKLN, the Power Move show at Ryerson every Saturday afternoon. Then as the evening progresses, once Mastermind moved over to Power 108 and had his mix show, and then you're listening to him. That was probably that was the first time we broke into commercial radio, but it was all college radio. Because then after that, around 10 o'clock, 10:30, you listen to Motion. Shout out to Motion and the U Bad Line, all of them with their radio show, the Master Plan show on CIUT around 10 o'clock. And that was the way you got everything that was coming out of the world, basically, but really, out of the U.S., things that you wouldn't have access to. But if you weren't plugged into those college stations, and if you weren't able to catch Michael Williams on Rap City, once a day or once a week, even when it was Soul in the City, then there was nothing other than the concerts. And I was too young to go to the big battles and all of that Ron Nelson used to put on. So I say it's a nutshell because you have to go and find it. And once you find it, you realize it's just a small group of you that are running behind this movement.
Toronto back then was known as the Screwface capital. What was that? What was
I
that?
think it still is to a certain degree.
What was that? What's that in reference to?
It's a kind of a self-hatred. Chaos put it really well in a song title called Crab Bucket. And really it is, if we both grew up in the same city, how can you be better than me at what we're both trying to do? And if you get lucky enough to break out of the city into New York or into the U.S. or the U.K., Europe, all of a sudden the love changes, even if the love was there in the first place, which it probably wasn't. It changes to a jealousy and an envy.
How did that impact your confidence as an artist back then?
It actually made me stronger.
How so?
Well, I get off on that. I grew up playing sports and playing hockey since I was 6, soccer since I was 6, and captained most of the teams I played for. So you got to get used to being hated.
So you were competitive.
Absolutely.
So I'm trying to get a sense of what this was. So was it as a performer? If you started showing, was there a feeling that when you would get up on stage and perform, everyone would be kind of looking at you again, screw-faced, but ready to hate you, and you would have to prove them wrong?
No, it's not everyone. It's just other rappers.
Right.
And other rappers maybe only represent 5% of what's in the crowd coming to watch your show, or watch the show, because it would be more of a group of artists, of different artists performing, and you just got lucky enough to get on the bill. Once you get on the bill, or you worked hard enough to get on the bill, once you get there, the crowd that's there is there to enjoy themselves. But there is that 5, maybe 10% of people
in the back of the room
that want your spot.
Yeah, right.
So again, like just like with sports, if you're a striker on your soccer team and you're captain there, it's not necessarily your teammates, it's the other teams that are like, we need to find a way to get him out of here. Or in hockey, you get up to you get the C on your shirt, and everybody on every other team is trying to find a way to get you out of there. And you realize the better you do, the more they're going to do it, the more they're going to try to get you out. So it's a simple comparison to kind of a bad situation in Toronto, but like I said, it breeds champions, because you learn how to fight against that and how to work against that and smile through it. You're gone. You're off to the races.
I want to play a track off your record, The Underground Tapes, right now, starting with one of the first songs that really got you buzzing. When I was in Newfoundland, again, we had access to Rhapsody and Rhapsody alone.
Mm-hmm.
This was all we knew. This is Saukrates featuring Marvel with "Hate Runs Deep" on cue.
Hate runs deep in the hearts of many.
Hate runs deep in the guts of all, cause your hate can judge your fate.
When gun sprays at nighttime, cause it's the right time for wrong. Index fingers touch rewind as my aura propels your mind state, leaving behind fake visions. You're blind cause it's hard to find. Lyrics flood the black market more than rock could steal. My stock's hot cause it's realer than real. When caps peel, pay rent for cement. Mother's heart's getting bent cause nights is trife. It's just chilling like a villain. Executing is killing, but there's no blood spilling. And it's just as illin'. Prepare for head filling when you enter my jurisdiction of non-fiction and lead filling if you step into men. Cause the yang is regretful when you're let full. Bleeding buckets of red from your head over ducats. I'm living for next year, my dear. I'll say cheers and guzzle 11 beers to celebrate the years of my life. I got more days than 4 days. So
that was a bit of Hate Runs Deep from Saukrates featuring Marvel. The video for that song won Best Rap Video at the 1996 Much Music Awards, made Saukrates' debut album one of the most anticipated Canadian hip-hop releases of that decade. But while we were listening to it, Saukrates, you were smiling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why?
Just a sense of nostalgia. I mean, added to some of the questions you asked before we played it, is, just get these flashbacks like it was yesterday. A lot of time has passed since then, but it still feels so fresh. I don't know. I don't want to call myself my own biggest fan, but every time I'm kind of connected with something cool like this, I get a little warm and fuzzy inside.
What inspired that song?
Marvel and myself, we're part of this clique that was called Figures of Speech, which has now become The Circle, and it's grown with Sha Claire and Julie Black and Solitaire and Road Dollar and Why Look, and it was just based on a battle. Marvel and I wanted to see who could come up with the deepest verse, simply that, and we did. We wrote it, and the next day we brought it back to work where we were working at Fresh Arts, again, big up to Motion, and laid it out in front of Oakwood Collegiate and with Cardi and everybody there. And nobody won. No one person won, but we realized, okay, we got something nice here. And I just started working with Gadget in his studio. Chaser just brought me down to work with Gadget, and that's the first thing we tried. We brought records in. I brought my acoustic bass in, big double bass.
Yeah, because you produced the beat too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Marvel helped me with the keys, and Gadget is kind of the overseeing producer, making sure everything sounds tight and teaching us how to use Notator and all these old school programs on the old Ataris.
So you were playing the upright bass on that?
Yeah, I played a couple notes to layer the bass behind the other parts that were in there.
Right.
But that's what it was. It was a battle, and we're like, okay, you know what? We're going to use these when we go into the studio the next chance we get. And I wrote another verse so we get a 3-verse version out of the song, and that's really how it started out of. I don't know if you could call that necessity, but it wasn't us saying let's write this song called "Hate Runs Deep." We had the lyrics because we had the lyrics.
Yeah, and it was so good you had to do something with it.
Had to.
And it's funny you mentioned the double bass because I know you were trained classically in bowed strings. We'll say that in the violin. I'm sure
Mainly violin. Yeah.
Yeah, violin, but the cello as well. Yeah.
A little bit. I know I can work my way around it. I'm not as good as some of the people I grew up playing in orchestras with.
Yeah.
But I know my way around it. But more so the double bass is the violin and then the bass. It's these single note features and a lot of pizzicato and listening to a lot of jazz.
Yeah.
Pushed me to pick up the bass. My brother brought it home one summer from school, and I was like, I gotta rock with this. Try to copy a few Tribe Called Quest bass lines and see if I could teach myself how to play it.
You have great ear.
Oh, thank you.
Or does your classical training influence how you hear and make hip hop?
Absolutely.
How?
Layers and orchestration, song arrangement.
Right.
From Hate Runs Deep and Still Caught Up in songs like that, moving forward, it helped me to manipulate samples and change the key here and there. But then also within arrangement, you've got your verse, your hook, your bridge. A lot of guys weren't doing bridges back then, so I was aware of the fact that there's more to a song than just 16 bars, here's your hook, another 16 bars, here's your hook. And even though it didn't show as much in the beginning because, I was really trying to kind of fit in with what everything else that was really good out there in the hip-hop world and, looping samples. But I was told that influence is being seen when I started, using more melody within my vocal and using my singing voice a lot more. And then all of a sudden it went just from being hip-hop loops and breaks to being actual songs.
I want to get into the singing a little bit later, and I want to get into more of the production just a little bit later. But first, I want to talk about one of the most impressive things at the time when this album came out was how many U.S. artists were on this record. I mean, we're talking Common and Pharoah Monch and Master Ace.
Yep.
Your album artwork was done by Mike Shinoda from Linkin Park. So now we live in a time of SoundCloud rappers. We live in a time where you can get your music out there. I mean, you must be laughing and going, how easy it is for people to get their music out there, because what did a Toronto artist need to do pre-internet to get attention and support south of the border?
Okay, well, there's a magic word called vinyl.
Yes, yeah.
Now, vinyl was a hustle. It took a hustle because to press vinyl records, for all those out there who don't know what sometimes we use vinyl for other than shoes.
Yes. So kids, before the internet, there was this physical apparatus that you put a needle on to play records.
That's right.
Go ahead. Yeah.
A very large black circle. And nowadays you can color it blue if you want.
Sure.
But the key was vinyl. So if you can hustle up a budget to press the music that you've created onto vinyl, that already was more than half the battle. The first battle is to make sure the music was good, of course, but let's just put that behind us, say, yes, the music is good. So now how do you get it to the people? You pressed vinyl. And as soon as you mailed it to the places, if you did your research, certain record stores, one major one that helped me through mine is Fat Beats from New York City, who also branched into L.A. and had connections in the UK. If they got their hands, if we were able to send them vinyl, then all of a sudden you were legitimate. It's that simple. It's not like today if you send a demo on a USB or 10 years ago, if you send a demo on a CD, anybody can do that. But with vinyl, not everybody could do that. It costs you maybe about $1.50, $2 a copy without artwork. So all of a sudden, you have to press a minimum of 1,000.
So how do you feel now when you see SoundCloud, this easy apparatus for music to not just be made, but for music to be shared?
Well, I like it. I do. The only thing, I guess, is that makes it more challenging for those who have something to share, something of quality, is now me as a listener, I have to sift through all the other, I would call it garbage because, I'm a critic myself. I have to sift through a whole bunch of garbage to get to the good stuff.
Right, the bar was higher back then. In order to get anything made at all, you had to be pretty good.
Well, yes. I mean, you could be bad, but as long as you had the budget.
Yeah, you had to be bad and rich or good and broke.
Yeah, you see what I'm saying? It's
Yeah,
like,
I do.
So it's this conundrum that still exists today, but just in a different form, So if you didn't have the money to press as many copies back in the day, then you might not get as much attention, but your music was better and you could still legitimize yourself with a piece of vinyl. Today now, it doesn't really cost you much at all to put it all out there, which is fine with me. But now it's just there's so much more to sift through. It's not that the quality of the music has gone down. It's just the quantity has gone up.
Speaking of money, take a listen to this. This is Saukrates with Money or Love on Q.
Let me tell it for a minute. Back at you now. Yeah. Dollar bill, y'all. Are these the hardest shoes to fill, y'all? Take it in. As far as money's concerned, I'ma rake it in. Your golden glove, too stiff, player, break it in. Never heard of surplus. The way we touched was like two tits. Who gets this busy, this much? Severed all my ties and burnt all my bridges. With the art of being broke, leaving y'all folks suspicious. Like, who's that? Cool cat, move back. Y'all focus on ones, I let two stack. I'ma prove that. The funk running my veins and finance running my brain. So they one and the same. My definition of success, keep it running from my reign. Acid, it's classic. Stresses of the game, moving past it. Save it for with drastic measures. Turn the common paper chaser seeking plastic pleasures. Smart card, my hard bargain, define pressure. The lowest I go is 50-50 split, no lesser. Ride with me, man, while we conquer this earth. Squeezing pennies out this thing called rap. For what it's worth, I'ma still get by.
It's Money or Love, a song off the 1999 debut album from my guest today, Canadian rap icon Saukrates. His debut album, The Underground Tapes, has just been reissued with bonus tracks and remixes. It's out now. We're talking a little bit about his career, about how he sees music now, and a little bit about how all of this came about. And that's you singing on the hook for that song.
Yes.
And if you're listening to this and you're a younger hip hop listener, it seems so common now, but you may not know that hip hop has had a contentious relationship with artists that rap and sing.
That's right.
What was the response like when you first started to sing as well as rap?
You know what? I think it was harder for me than it was for the public to digest it.
What do you mean?
Because I was very shy. I still am very shy, but it took a while to build up the courage to sing on a record. It seemed like it would have been shunned upon only because nobody else was doing it back then, other than me and Chaos and Lauryn Hill.
Right.
Maybe Missy Elliott, but even she came a little later than that. And it wasn't, you wouldn't expect it to be accepted, but we still tried it. And so that's why I say, because of my shyness, it was a little harder to get it going. Mm-hmm. But once we got it going, it's like, it garnered so much more attention. It's like, maybe we should have been doing this from before, or long ago. But, you got to take time to develop your voice and get the confidence up to be able to compete with KC and JoJo,
right,
or Aaron Hall.
But I'm, in addition to the attention that you got, I'm curious because when you did Big Black Lincoln, when you released the Big Black Lincoln project, mm-hmm, you were singing all over it.
Yes.
What do you get as an artist out of singing rather than rapping?
I wouldn't say rather than. It's more like an opportunity to do more, Yeah. So we do both. So on the Big Black Lincoln, the concept was we're all hip hop artists, but we can all sing. So why don't we give it to them? Like, let them know that that we can do this and do it well, with all the nostalgic type funk and blues and on that record, a little bit of rock. Let's just show them that we can do it because we've been doing it for years. Now that's almost 10 years after, Hate Runs Deep and Father Time. So over that time, you can build the confidence. Because by the time we got to the Big Black Lincoln album, I'd sung on, 1,000 hooks, and my mojo was going. And to be surrounded by guys that I could call in and say, okay, you know what, let's do a group. So, me, Trax from IRS, Shakari Knight, Rodala, and DJ Agile from Brass Monk. I realized that they were all like so close. Mm-hmm. And we had this idea, me and Chase had this idea to be like, okay, well, let's make a group out of this. I had recorded a couple demos. It's like, man, we could actually make a group out of this. And we did it because we always wanted to break ground. And once I had the confidence up from earlier, especially coming off of Money or Love and the success of it, it's like, yeah, let's get it, and let's do it before anybody else does.
A Big Black Lincoln, if you're listening to this, I will admit that it was a new record to me, and it's really tremendous. Like it's a really incredible record. And if this is a record that's new to you somewhere across Canada, check it out. It's one of the highly underrated releases of that era. Tanika Charles, a singer you may know from listening to this show, was asked by the CBC to pick an album she thought every Canadian should have in rotation for Canada's 150th, and she picked that one.
Wow.
Why didn't that album, though, connect with audiences the way that a lot of critics thought it would?
That's the business got in the way.
What do you mean?
Simply put, we had full support from Sony. Big up to Denise Donlin, who was running Sony at the time, 03, 04. We had full support when they were up at Leslie and Eglinton. All of our budgets were tripled and quadrupled when we brought them in. They said, no, we're going to go bigger. We're going to go bigger. Then as soon as we're getting ready to release the album, I guess it was around October of that year, Sony and BMG merged. And Denise was out.
Right.
And Lisa Zabitnu was brought in. She was head of BMG. And she didn't have the same interests.
She wasn't as supportive of your music?
I'd say that's kind of
that's a bit of a stretch.
Understatement.
Oh, okay, right. It's an understatement. So she failed, or Sony at the time, Sony BMG failed to market this album in the way that it warranted.
Absolutely.
Why?
Well, like I said, the person who was in charge, Lisa, she wasn't around. Obviously, she had a lot to deal with the merger, and the people that she appointed into positions to help us finish what we started had no power. So, basically you sit and wait for about a year and a half. That album was done 2 years prior to its release.
If you're just listening to this, we're talking to Saukrates a little bit about kind of forming a great foundation for Canadian hip-hop in the late 90s and influencing and pioneering so many different artists. And we talked a little bit earlier, if you're just tuning in, about, and you said in a shell?
In a peanut shell.
In a peanut shell was how you could describe Toronto's hip-hop scene in the mid-'90s or late 90s.
That's right.
Very different now. It's no longer that uncommon to hear local hip-hop on Toronto's commercial airwaves. Without a question, the most significant change happened when Toronto's Drake became one of the most popular young rap artists in the world. And you have history with Drake and 40, Noah Shabib, his longtime collaborator. They met through you, is that right?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think it's more like gelled, got an opportunity to gel because we had to be in the studio together. And a young Drizzy needed a spot to record some of his new ideas. Again, I think this is about 05. Needed a spot to record some new ideas, and I had brought 40 back into the studio after he had come up under the tutelage of Gadget. Who still works with OVO, right? Yeah, now he's back in.
Right.
Yeah, he's been back in for some time now. But there was a separation, and during that separation, I brought 40 back to a separate studio that I was working at, and it just so happened that I met Drake and Boy Wonder and D10 and all these talented guys that were just, foaming at the mouth with wonderful work, and they just needed a place to try some ideas out. And Rich Kid was coming up as well at that time. So I brought them into the studio, and I guess maybe reintroduce them. They might have come across each other before. I know there was a Divine Brown remix that 40 had done that I said, hey, why don't you try, Drake out? But they really got an opportunity to gel once I said, okay, Drake, here's a studio you can record at. Stay in touch with 40. You guys get it going. Because I went on tour as well, so I wasn't able to be there all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, next thing you know, it's just absolute magic that they're coming up with.
Did you know it? I mean, we talked about your ears a little earlier. You know what works. Did you know when you heard that music that this is going to be?
Absolutely. I don't think anybody could know how big it would eventually be,
right?
Like where it's come today,
right?
But I knew that there was quality that needed to be. It needed a home, and not necessarily a label home. It just needed a home where it could be created, and we provided that studio space. But not only a studio space, producers' ears, collaborations, and they took it and ran with it, and it's so beautiful to see what has happened.
But as someone who's had a lot of success yourself in hip hop, do you get it? Like, can you pinpoint? Oh, this is the reason it's working. This is the reason people like it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a science to it.
You think so?
Yes.
What is it? It might be. That's a big question.
That's a big question.
But
to put it simple, is we always want to feel something when it comes to feeling music, feeling the art of music. You want to be able to close your eyes and feel something. Either you envision something, whether it's a story that you're very close to, especially love and relationships. And when you're a man singing or rapping about a woman fan is going to be a lot closer to that than rapping about hanging out on the corner and being in the sewer, right? Like Das Effects, But so we want to feel something emotionally. But then also there's that other thing that we must not forget, that we also love to dance. Mm-hmm. We love for our bodies to be moved. And this music that we've all been making is movement music. It's not necessarily waltzing to a classical Mozart piece. It's boogie woogie. It's the funk. And since Chuck Berry, let's say, and then Elvis after that, it's always been something that the system has fought against, because we have the power to control large masses of countries and populations just through something as simple as music.
Yeah, and that's something as simple as a beat.
As a beat.
Yeah.
And that's the science of it. So if your beat, the science then is, 100 BPM, 120 BPM, et cetera, et cetera. You can find your tempo. But as long as you got that bump in there, nothing can stop us. There is a quote I saw in a book, I think it was called The Devil's Horn, and God had said, and this is not verbatim, but God had said, heaven forbid that the artist, the musical artist, show his or her face, because they have no God. They don't follow their God. They are their own gods, and the science that they use through music can supersede God's power. Now, that's not my words, but these are things that I've heard about the power of music, and then just working on it and working with it over all these years and loving it, I feel that I can be swayed.
Well, yeah, there's very few things in this life that we can't control. We can control most of the things we do.
Right.
And I often think that laughing and moving, like being moved by something, wanting to dance, wanting to not, these are the two things that we can't control.
That's right.
So therefore, they're the most dangerous things in the world.
Very good point.
Yeah.
Very good point. I agree.
How do you feel about, as someone who helped create the Toronto hip-hop environment that has now become, the Toronto sound is wanted by everybody in hip-hop right now, or at least a lot of people in hip-hop right now. It's a thing.
But what is the Toronto sound?
We did a piece on the story of the Toronto sound. Do you think there is one?
No. That's the beauty in it. What I've described the Toronto sound is to be anything. That's kind of what's cool about being from here, because we came in new. So especially when it comes to hip hop, Nobody says, the North Coast or whatever, we are the North and this whole thing coming in. But if you really dig in deep to not only what is successful now, but what has brought us success over the last 20-something years, especially in hip-hop, everybody's different from one another. It's not just one thing. Now, today, let's not get it twisted. To be popular, unfortunately, you feel like you have to sound like somebody else. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the 80s, 90s, and moving into early 2000s, if you sounded like somebody else, you weren't going to make it. So that's kind of flipped. But again, the Toronto sound to me is not just what is modern. It's not just what is, playing on certain radio stations or it's not only what every 16-year-old like my son is listening to. It's not just that. There's so many different styles underneath this, what you call an urban umbrella, that if somebody comes looking for the Toronto sound, they might want to be a little more specific.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of my clients as a producer, they'll be like, I'm looking for the Saukrates sound,
right,
which is different from the 40 sound,
right,
which is different from the Boy Wonder sound, which is different from the T-minor sound, different from the Cardinal Official, different from the Chaos sound, is different, and it goes on, different from the Arthur MacArthur sound, and the list goes on and on and on. If you compare, you put all of those people I just mentioned on a list, you realize that they're all different from one another. But all of them have found success in their own way.
What does your 16-year-old think of your music?
I don't think he thinks much about it. Right? My wife is in the control booth. I mean, she knows. We hear his music coming through the, coming through the walls, and it's not my music.
What does he listen to?
That he's playing. I mean, modern stuff. Some of it I'm not even aware of, or sometimes I can't put the names to the songs because a lot of it just sounds the same, like this, mixtape. Right. Everybody's rapping over the same beat at times, which to me can be annoying. But I understand it's almost like dance hall where you get 4 or 5 different artists on the same beat. You get Sean Paul and Beanie Man, and they'll have 2 different songs over the same beat. Today, I find a lot of that happening. So I don't want to date myself and just go for the super popular ones. But you get like, Lil Yachty and Ray Shremmerd, and those are a little more the standout guys.
But do you go to him and go, "Look, man, look what I did.
No,
look what we did."
No, I don't force that. I don't force that on him. I think my wife Alana is more so. She'd be like, "Well, your dad just did this song. You got to come hear it." And you know what? I think more so he respects it. And not only in our area, but around the city, he gets to see the fact that we have kind of put a footprint down as far as a sound, and he's familiar with all of the work I've done. But we don't thrust that upon him. We know, they want to rock out with what they want to rock out with. And when I was his age, it was just, the same thing. I'm blasting Bismarcky in my bedroom, and my parents downstairs have no clue as what we're rocking to, So the new is good, but he knows a little bit about it, enough to respect it.
Saukrates, it's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Me too.
The reissue of this debut album, The Underground Tapes, again, an important moment for Canadian hip hop. And however, I do think there'll be people listening to this interview right now who are going to open up Spotify, maybe even young people open up Spotify.
I would hope so. Yeah, that would be great.
Go on iTunes, download, buy the record. What are you hoping and even people who knew the record back in the late 90s, what are you hoping people take away from the Underground Tapes when they listen to it now?
That's hard to say. I think the best way of putting it is there are many fans and even friends, close friends, who over the years didn't necessarily get a chance once we realized 10 years had passed and they didn't get a chance to keep a copy of the original. And time moves so fast. I guess it was important for me to, and my faculty to make it available again for those who wanted it from the past. And then there are a lot of those who picked up later who weren't there when it came out, 96, 97, 98, 99. Mm-hmm. And, they more got into hip hop around, 05, 06, and they realized, oh, wow, we have this. And it wasn't available on these new plateaus. So I think to get the old and the new, this was the best way to bring it back out. We had been itching to find ways on how to reissue it, and I think we found the right way.
What about you? Now you've had in remixing it and remastering it and re-releasing it, you've had to listen to it again.
Yes.
What do you hear?
Nostalgia. You know, it's more like what I see.
What do you see?
I remember, being, in high school, putting out music which felt amazing, where not everybody gets a chance to start that early. An 86 Mustang, driving a black 86 Mustang. The world feeling like it's your oyster. And being able to use that power that we were gaining to kind of, live a little more of an exciting life, I guess. And it's not monetarily. It wasn't like getting rich. It was more like the more you get to meet more people, you get to go into certain rooms where you weren't allowed before and share your thoughts. Meet women like my wife I met in 99 and be cool enough, quote unquote, to be able to pull such a beautiful specimen, because you're experienced, you're a worldly individual. And it lent so much to the future that I don't think I'd be the same person now if I didn't have that opportunity then.
Saukrates, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me. Oh, and sorry, I know I might be brown nosed, but I gotta thank my wife Alana for getting me here. I gotta big her up for that because it was, the traffic and the timing and everything, and she was not gonna let me be late. So, I gotta love family for helping me to make it to see you.
You know what? I'll say this on our behalf. Thanks, Alana. Thank you. Saukrates is a musician and producer from Toronto. His 1999 debut album, The Underground Tapes, has just been reissued with bonus tracks, remixes. It's available now. New verses,
yes. Hate Runs Deep 2017. Getting Cardinal over Shal and Chaclair on it was amazing. But what was even bigger for me is the fact that I was able to find Marvel again. And he hadn't been working for a while. His girlfriend had passed a couple years prior, and he was still kind of in mourning and a little down on himself. And we had a chat, and we were able to get him to do a verse. And the last thing he said after he laid his verse, he said, "Man, you put the battery back in my back." So I'm the most happiest about getting Marvel on that record. And then look out for Father Time 2017. I won't say who's on it, but we got a couple guests, and that will be part of the reissue as well.
I can't wait.
Thank you.
Saukrates spoke with me from our Q studio.